I'm Jeremy Littell with the Department of Interior and USGS Alaska Climate Science Center. One of 3 terrestrial ecosystem coordinating team members. Both Steve Gray and Eric Kosicki couldn't make it today. And the purpose of the call was to basically pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago from the joint atmosphere and fire discussion, which I was unable to attend most of. I caught some of it from the back of a 15-passenger van on mute the whole time. So I was able to hear some of that and then picked up some of the pieces from the recorded version. But we didn't want to let it sit too long before we went further, because the interest evident in that phone call indicated to me both that there was an interest and need from both management and remote community perspectives for doing more work in this area, but we had yet to put in place some kind of mind map or whatever you want to call it of who's doing what on the issue and who's poised to contribute what to those questions. So I wanted to pick up that discussion from the wildfire and terrestrial standpoint. A couple other participants had hoped to join us today but could not because of time conflicts, and Rachel Lohman was one of those, and she does work on fire and fire effects and climate and fire in Alaska, as well as some other things related to communities in the Western Arctic, and she has some input too potentially. So with that, I guess what I wanted to do is try to direct our discussion toward some idea of what IARPIC can do to try and move forward both the discussion as well as in a time of less funding, and in particular with Joint Fire Sciences Program funding potentially vulnerable, how we might better articulate both the need and the capacity and try to get some work towards those goals that were articulated on the call the other day. So, with that, I'm not that familiar with the research in particular on our the capacity that we have as a community to describe potential impacts to, say, villages or remote communities in Arctic and interior Alaska, and who's doing what. I caught a little bit on the phone, but I guess maybe we can round robin, and if anybody has stuff in progress that's poised to address those, it would be helpful for me to know that before we get too much further and I claim nobody's doing what's needed.
Well, Jeremy, this is Heidi. I guess I saw that one of the bullets was specifically what's being done in the way of smoke modeling. And I know on our fire weather page, we have links to 4 different smoke models that are available. And of course, Martin's is one of them, the UAF smoke. And I feel like that's probably one of the best when it can run, right, Martin? Because he does a pretty good job of taking good inputs from our database as to what fires are burning, how much is burning each day, and trying to put that into something realistic. Blue Sky also has been helpful in 2015 when we had a pretty significant fire season here in Alaska. They ran a window just for us, and that was pretty good. It did pretty well, at least as far as showing where general smoke patterns were headed and where the problems were going to be. And it was really nice to have the higher resolution over Alaska. There's also the high resolution rapid refresh, which is available. And then National Weather Service has a basic model that does show smoke. I believe it's at the surface and then vertically integrated. And I really don't know much on that one. So yeah, that's what I know is out there. I can't say how well any of them perform, other than I know Blue Sky did a mediocre job, at least during the summer of 2015. And since then, we haven't had a good fire season. I know we were hoping to get Martin's running one of these summers, and then there just hasn't been much happening.
So Heidi, I'll ask a couple questions of you then. Those are definitely for current fires, almost in a forecasting sense, right? What kind of outlooks might be issued, that sort of thing?
Yes, yeah, some of them are, well, actually, I think all of them now have pretty good graphics as far as showing where patterns are headed, where smoke is headed around the state.
Okay.
Heidi, thanks for the, if I may chime in, Jeremy, for a moment. Thanks for the,
Sure, Martin.
for the advertisement, Heidi. That's very nice. And I have to say, when I started with fire emissions, it's now 13 years ago, there were not many models out there, and nowadays we have quite a number of really great models. So the models are mostly pretty nicely developed. The main problem with fires is the source data. In Alaska, we have so many remote fires. Partly we miss them. We have, of course, capabilities with satellites these days, but still, especially speaking about smoke, more than 50% of the emissions are from low intensity fires, which we often don't catch with satellites. So that's one of our focus here with the Year of Smoke initiative to get better source data. And we try, and Alison and Heidi and others here do a great job to bring the different communities together, bring the Alaska Interagency Coordination Center in. They have great data. We have airborne source data, observations data from people on the ground, and of course, new satellite capabilities. And that's one of the focus areas we work on. And we actually had our model running daily this year, and we are very happy that we could use all the source data to initialize the model. But channel models are great. It's the availability of the source data to get a better idea of what is burning and how are the fire characteristics. Thanks.
So Martin, can I ask what currently constitutes the sources that go into your model? You said you were just running it daily.
Currently, we have VS and MODIS fire products. We have our own VS algorithm here. Chris Weigel, she couldn't join the meeting. She's a PhD student. She has to defend in a month, so she's pretty busy these days. And she worked on new capabilities with VS satellite data. But we also have a synthesis of satellite with airborne data from the fire management here, and also with observational data. So we try to bring all the data together, and in Alaska we are very fortunate to have the AICC, the Alaska Interagency Coordination Center, which provides great data. But with all modeling efforts, the source data, that's the main issue. And I started a few years back. That's more a hobby. I'm a pilot too, so I do some airborne measurements with a particle spectrometer to validate the models. When we started, of course, people get excited fast, and the Weather Service used our model, and then they said, "Oh, your model shows half the particle concentration here in Fairbanks and what we actually see on the measurements." And of course, there needs to be a lot of education done to what's a model output on a 2.2 kilometer grid cell. How can it be compared to a 1-point measurement somewhere between a house corner and somewhere in the city boundaries or anywhere else? So that's always a problem to get criticism on models pretty fast, but of course it's a big challenge to get the models right.
So Martin, let me ask you a quick question before we move on then. So the main difficulty in the modeling, at least from your perspective, is that the source data is difficult to pin down?
That's correct. That's absolutely the main challenge. All the atmospheric data, of course, there, especially in Alaska, we don't have a lot of measurement sites, but models, atmospheric models for short-term forecasts are already pretty advanced with all the data simulation. We work closely with NOAA Earth System Research Lab and our colleagues there. They initialized the rapid refresh or high resolution rapid refresh model, which has really good atmospheric data, relatively good for Alaska, but we are pretty happy with all the atmospheric data we get there. So the accuracy of wind and temperature fields, that's not the biggest challenge in this effort to predict fire emissions.
Okay, great.
And Martin, if I may, I was going to ask two more questions. One, you said the VIIRS and MODIS products. So are those the active fire products? And if so, how are you turning those into particulate sources? And then my other question is there value? So obviously getting sort of where the fires are now and then forecasting that with an atmospheric transport model is, as I imagine, most of what you do, although I have to admit, I'm not entirely familiar, but how much value would be added from actually forecasting where the fires will be burning on the ground, say 2, 3, 4 days in advance?
Yeah, that's I think the main, I wouldn't see too extreme value to forecast where the fires are, because that causes a lot of inaccuracies in the actual fire emissions models. I wouldn't go so far at this point. And we had one evening here in interior Alaska, we had 11,000 lightning strikes, and to forecast which strikes produces an actual fire with emissions and put this in the emission model, that would be very bold, I would say. But to get a better grasp on fire development, fire spread modeling, and couple this with fire emission models, that's of course of high value. But still, whenever I fly over a fire and then compare what data we put in the model, I see there's a lot of work needed besides satellite remote sensing to get a better idea what is burning at which intensity. And I know a lot of people work on this challenge, and we also joined the group here, and there's progress, definitely.
And maybe I'm jumping the gun here, and Brendan, you might have more to say on this, but that begs the question too, when we start to project future dynamics and future vulnerability in different regions of the state. One of the questions that came up during the last National Climate Assessment chapter writing for the state of Alaska is how well can we project this? And I think that the author team, whether erroneously or not, concluded that at this point it's a nascent capacity, and that primarily what we had was the ability to say there's more fire, there's different atmospheric dynamics, and you got vegetation change coupled with that, and you have communities that are in the mix of all this. And so it's reasonable to expect in many places that you'll have more frequent events that are an issue, but whether those events are novel in their magnitude and whether or not you can say with any certainty different regions are more or less vulnerable than others was unclear. And so, Martin's comments on, fire forecasting for existing events, we can simulate a lot of potential future events and their sizes and their intensities and things like that, but you end up with the same kind of issues that you get with the future climate modeling in terms of uncertainty and the spread of projected outcomes.
And Jeremy, I want to clarify, it's very important to forecast the fire danger and where fires might develop. But we have to distinguish between climate modeling or modeling fire probability for fire management or to prepare for the hazard, for the risk, and to near real-time short-term fire emissions forecasting. So
right, yes.
So there's of course high value in forecasting the fire risk and where fires might develop.
Okay. Does anybody else want to jump in with ongoing activities we might want to be aware of.
Can I ask a question? This is Randy.
Of course.
I just was curious. I know that was quite an effort and use of the supercomputer time to do those daily UAF smoke products this year. And I was just curious from whether Martin or Heidi could speak to whether how much use, I mean, were the products useful and or accurate? How much agency use do you think there was of the products, or did you just not have much need for the data this year?
Yeah, for us, Randy, there really wasn't much need for the data. I can't say I really looked at it.
But Heidi, is that because of the nature of this year's fire year, or is that because in general it wouldn't be useful?
No, it was because of this year's fire season. We just didn't have the smoke intrusions like we have in the past. We actually had very little fire on the ground overall. So the season just didn't call for the need for it. Had it been 2015, I probably would have been looking at it every day, but it wasn't like that.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, we get sometimes calls from the public too, and this year was very mediocre, fortunately, since we didn't have extensive fire activity here.
Yeah, and I could add that for us at the Alaska Fire Service, we're not just getting questions for health purposes, but we also get questions from fire managers about where they can move their resources. Because if, for instance, we have everything on the ground in Fairbanks and Fairbanks gets smoked in, we can't go. This is even a bigger issue than you might just think with health and air quality. It also gets onto visibility and able to conduct operations.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually happy with operations. Of course, Alaska is a state where aviation has a special value, and I saw some dispatches from Alaska Airlines looking at our models. So it's of high use for the aviation community, for them to know what's the chance to be below visibility minimums to conduct operations.
That's great to know. I hadn't even considered that, but it makes a lot of sense now that you mention it.
Yeah,
You
like,
know, it also impacts the tourist industry quite a bit. We'll get questions from your small aviation operators that want to know if they can take people out to see Denali or up onto the North Slope, and becomes a big deal in a lot of different ways.
All right. Well, in the interest of keeping us on schedule, are there any other questions, or does anybody else want to talk about an ongoing effort that they're aware of?
This is Molly with DEC. We do have an effort that's kind of new this year. Of course, we have monitoring stations all over the state, but because of our regional haze, the new rules with the regional haze, we are able to deduct wildfire smoke from our visibility matrix. And because of also other changes with the rules, we're going to be going backwards in time, I think, through 2004 and looking at the exceptional events. And it's looking at not the entire state, but the 4 Class 1 areas in the state. So we will be doing some modeling or at least data collection this winter because we get to go backwards. That's just kind of 4 areas of the state. Of course, Denali is one of those. Tuxedo, Baranoff, and I'm trying to think of the other one it's out in the sea. But what we have with Denali, of course, is we really look at the Fairbanks information. And then, I don't know, Mark, are you available yet to speak? Mark Smith, our meteorologist, is actually on a fire call, and he wasn't sure if he could join.
I'm done.
Okay, can
I've
you
been
talk
listening for a
about
little
the
bit.
exceedances?
Just that you're talking about in the past, we had exceedances that the EPA or that we flagged that the EPA are now taking out, which was like 2009, 2010. We're working on 2013. We just got the letter for 2013, and then the 2015 we're currently working on. So the one that I'm working on now, just currently we flagged 7 days, I believe, for 2015 to remove out of that regional haze model.
Yeah, but we don't really do any modeling with our data from the monitoring stations except when we have a need for it. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe Dee handles all that.
Yeah.
And she's not here. She's out of town, so that she's not in the meeting today.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk to our modeler about if you have any additional information that you want, but as far as the question, who's doing what to model smoke from wildfires, that's what we're doing.
It seems, and since I don't do emissions modeling of any kind, but it seems like there's the potential, and Brendan, I'd be curious on your thoughts here too, but there's the potential for a better validation, not just on the daily forecast, but kind of on a seasonal time scale that would allow maybe some development for the way we handle future potential emissions and things like that. Is that ridiculous to think, or is that, I mean, as these resources become available and we have a better idea retrospectively of what each of those major fire years in the last couple of decades really looked like, might be able to better assess where we do and don't do good modeling.
For sure, evaluation data, that's the key to improve models, and so we try to get a hold on all evaluation data we can get to check how the models perform. And especially with fires, it's not only the data on the ground. We have a lot of plume dynamics, and there's it's evaluation data, especially from airborne evaluation data, are way scarce, and any effort there, any initiative would be wonderful. I have to say, to Molly's comment, we helped with the 2009 wildfires with WRF-Chem for the to DEC to distinguish between the fire emissions and the anthropogenic emissions. And I think DEC uses the WRF-Chem model now, our application here, which is great. Great for us. There are other models which are good, but I'm very happy to help with some useful modeling capabilities.
Okay, great. Any other either questions for Molly or Mark, or anybody want to step in with something else ongoing? In the absence of that, I'll offer what Rachel had for input. As soon as I can get it back up here. They're doing a fair amount of work in coastal Alaska wildfire impacts on communities, not just smoke emissions, but also things like subsistence resources and other aspects of human health. And that's as much a community or observational effort. But then secondarily, they're looking at fire behavior and fuel model development with an eye towards some of the more technical fire modeling that Rachel's done in the past for other regions, including development of a fire BGC module for interior Alaska, which looks at ecological and fire behavior metrics as outcomes of fire events. And her point that I asked specifically for is what can she do in the future to either participate with a larger group or to address these kinds of issues with smoke emissions and human health? And of course, her answer was it depends on funding. And she raised the interesting issue of the potential vulnerability of Joint Sciences Program funding, at least for those kinds of activities, and that she definitely was interested in trying to work with others to look at future emissions, given future fire behavior and fuel expectations. And then also the atmospheric dynamics that you might get from dynamical downscaling or other activities. And so that was her ongoing stuff has much more to do with looking at the ways that fuels might change, fires might change, and how they might affect coastal Alaskan communities. So I'm probably not doing the full justice that she would do if she were here to describe them, but just that she had some skin in the game already and was interested in potentially collaborating with others. And that brings to mind, if Martin pointed out that understanding where the current fires are is one of the main limiting factors for the forecasting, and then the other is the atmospheric limitations, and both those play very limiting roles in the potential for future projections too, and how it might change in particular regions of the state. So I just thought I'd put that on the table. I guess what I'm hearing is, unless anyone tells me otherwise, is that we have a lot of the pieces in place here, but that there's both some fundamental scientific uncertainties, both in the forecasting and the projecting future realms that limit what we can say specifically about the human health aspects. And while we have monitoring and we have a lot of modeling that's effective, or at least waiting for a test case on the current observation side, we have less info about what to expect in the future other than what we can say just with more fire.
This is Molly. There's one more thing that might be worth looking at. And, every year we calculate all the fires and the emissions resulting from those fires. And a lot of that is linked to, what kind of vegetation is burning, the fuel load. So we do have some emission numbers every year, and the data of where those fires are that might be helpful in that regard. Also, the EPA they put out a greenhouse gas report every year, and they really focus on fire emissions. However, their data in the last reports have been coastal Alaska up through South Central and Southeast. They do want to put more of an effort into interior Alaska. And, I hope to work with them a little bit this year at finding data sources. I, provided them the information from USGS, and they just incorporated some of that this year. So be aware that initiative is also ongoing, and it kind of gives an idea about emissions. It's focused on, not just greenhouse gas, but also the carbon and particulate matter. So just another initiative that's out there.
Okay. And so is that a regional EPA effort?
It's headquarters effort.
Okay.
They put out this report every year. We provided comments and said your data isn't, it's not. They weren't look. There was some really great data available on. I know that within a month they turned around at least some information on wetlands, acknowledging that the data's there. They recrunched some numbers, but I think they made the statement in the report in our discussion that, they want to start focusing a little bit more on interior Alaska because they just don't have a whole understanding of the state.
Right, as if anybody did, but yeah, that's a good emphasis, and particularly for a place where both the surface vegetation and the soil emissions are changing rapidly. So that's good to know. Yeah,
they're kind of bringing in the soil. I kind of said to them that you need to kind of be aware of the science on permafrost and vegetation changes. So they've got it flagged. I don't know if they know what to do with it, but they are looking at just incorporating more data on other places of the state. And that report's on their website. Our comments are on their website.
Well, and that brings up, outside of interior, the increased attention for tundra shrub fire, both in western Alaska and on the North Slope. And do you know if they're considering any of that as well? Or, I mean, that's a relatively, go ahead.
They use the, I'm not looking at it right now, but they do use the vegetation sectors like grassland, agricultural land, et cetera. They do not have one for tundra. But when we submit our wildfire data, of course, we include what vegetation is being burned, whether they use it or not. But I think they're recognizing the tundra as, kind of a different element. I don't know if they'll incorporate everything into the next year's report or if there will be a next year's report. I'm hoping there will be. But it's an area that I think you might hear more about. And at some point, maybe this winter, I'll be coordinating more with them for, different information and sources.
Okay, great. Thank you. One other question, and again, Brendan, I'm going to pick on you if you're still on. Eric's not here to talk about any of the above activities related to this, and it seems like certainly above affiliated projects would likely have addressed some of this, but I'm actually not up on where that's at. Do you know enough to comment, or?
Well, I guess as far as I know, in phase 1, all of the firework is really sort of more ground focused, not necessarily interactions with atmosphere and transport. So I think so far it might be safe to say there's not a ton in this specific realm of smoke transport health effects. But that said, well, there is some work on the sort of subsistence side of things. But I know that it has been sort of identified as a topic for phase 2, in part because everything is supposed to move more in the realm of what they're calling ecosystem services as opposed to ecosystem dynamics. So interactions with the different communities on the human side of things. So I think, yeah, I guess my take is that it's been flagged as an important topic. There was some initial talk of addressing some of it with the airborne campaign, the smoke, but that didn't really wind up happening in terms of what was selected. So hopefully more down the line, hopefully phase 2 happens. But so far, most of the firework is really sort of focused on carbon emission side, sort of how old the carbon is, vegetation impacts, some succession work, those types of things.
Yeah, and Rachel mentioned that she was an affiliate, but sort of in that affiliate with a lowercase a rather than uppercase, in that she, is collaborating with above people on a number of related things, but is not herself an above project. So that kind of fits as well. Okay. Well, we've got a little time left to try and keep us on task. I guess my next question for the group is that, as we assemble the terrestrial and wildfire milestones for the year, and as we look towards next year and what it means in what's obviously a turbulent time for everybody, but if there is a sort of swirl of activity on this, and we have a clearly identified need and a clearly stated set of current capacities and also limitations, is there a role for IARPIC to help try to move either the conversation forward or to try and discuss more specifically how we might, as a group, assemble an effort and or try to find funding to do some of that kind of work, and who's poised to do it? I don't want to overstep our role, and I don't obviously want to push anybody off something they don't want to get pushed off of. But if anybody has thoughts toward that, and I'm interested in hearing it. If it would help, I think that among the Alaska Fire Science Consortium, National Weather Service up here, and a little bit in terms of USGS work in the communities and on fire, we might be able to assemble a more clearly articulated statement of need. And then there's a parallel question about, you know, future vulnerabilities and things like that with respect to climate change.
What would the statement of need amount to, Jeremy?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think that, you know, I think people, or at least myself, my bias is that the main effect here is smoke and particulate, you know, in the summertime or the end of the fire season in communities. But I hadn't really considered the aviation issues, both in terms of fire suppression and then also, you know, commercial transport in the parts of Alaska where that's a absolutely key piece of the infrastructure. You know, it's one thing to think about cars stopped on a highway. It's entirely another to think about planes that can't fly. And in Alaska, that's a big problem. And we have, you know, as Heidi and Martin articulated earlier, we have this nascent forecasting capability, and are, you know, sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily waiting for the next big fire year, but it's yet, it's wanting some evaluation and measurement in terms of its capability, but we're getting close to that ability, and it's getting close to useful. If for example, Alaska Airlines is paying attention to Martin's products, then you could argue we're already at useful to somebody. And so if the statement of need would help, you know, coalesce potential RFPs, for example, from the right entities, then it would be something worth us putting effort towards, so that those who are poised to do the work can actually go after that funding. If it's just a question of that funding is already available elsewhere and it's just the impetus to go after it and write proposals, then that's another story. Does that make any sense? I'm just thinking about this as I go. So.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess my question was more on the practical side. Like, what would, so you, the three organizations, the Fire Science Consortium, Weather Service, and USGS would put out sort of a joint statement of need about this topic in general, or I guess what form does that take? Again, more on the practical side.
And here's where my naivete about IARPIC comes in, and that is, you know, is this a white paper document that we jointly put our effort behind? And, you know, maybe, and Martin's not on the phone, but maybe our colleagues at NSF or Emeritus can fill me in, because I'm still learning the ropes as I go. But if the role is to actually say, look, there's a synthetic opportunity here, and we want to increase the visibility of the issue itself so that it becomes a catalyst for potential funding. I don't necessarily know that we need our various agency logos on it only. You know, if it's a IARPIC community effort, then I'm happy to have it be that. It was just an idea.
This is Allison. I think that this is an absolutely appropriate role for IARPIC, because this is really a cross-agency problem, and we're looking at ways to maximize the utility of agency resources for each other. Just as a sort of start on a statement of need, this is one of the priorities in the recently updated Alaska Wildland Fire Coordinating Group research needs list. And so we can start with that. And I think that I think it would be great to put together some sort of a white paper that essentially synthesizes the discussions that we had last week and this, of what are the ongoing efforts, where are the opportunities for synthesis, where are the knowledge gaps. And I think we could do some shopping around with that. And we're happy to be helpful in making that happen. I can send you guys.
Wow, thanks, Allison.
I can send the text. In fact, I'll stick it in the chat right now. I got to say, it is priority 23 of 29, which tells you these guys got a lot on their plate. Lots of science is needed, but anyway, I will send that along to you guys.
And while you're putting things in the chat, I want to call people's attention to what Randy's put in there about a current joint fire sciences project on tundra fire emissions. with the PI cast of characters, you would obviously expect Dan Mann, Ben Gagliotti, and Ben Jones. Okay, well that's great, Allison, and I'm glad we steered our conversation back onto the priorities list. It's always a positive approach.
And just to clarify, this is Randy. I think the Mann Gagliotti Jones project is more about the future of fires with climate warming in tundra, not directly about emissions, but obviously someone said that one of the missing links is if we know where fire and how much fire is in the future, it would be helpful in taking that to emissions.
Yeah, I
and
don't.
going back. Sorry, this is the. So this is Simon, and in the absence of Martin, I'll agree with Allison about the potential role for IOPIC in this. I mean, I think the earlier part of this conversation indicated, how much is going on, and I think sort of the resources are always going to be in effect in the agencies. So the agencies hold the resources, of agencies and departments hold the resources. So that's the source for sponsoring any activity. But I think it's totally appropriate for you to explore sort of maybe next steps that are reachable, perhaps with a modest, next steps that are reachable through better coordination and potentially actual collaboration amongst agencies, amongst departments, and then the question is, with say this white paper, going after the resources to take those steps. IOPIC itself doesn't have a bunch of funds. It basically, you have to sort of say, well, who might fund this next step? And one or two tangible next steps is probably better than a long list.
Great, thanks for the clarification, and that was better said than I could say it, but effectively what I'm thinking of in answer to Brendan's question.
So Jamin, I of course fully agree, and I see there's some opportunities for us within the joint fire science program, but it should be more collaborative between other agencies too. And of course, is it just a matter of writing proposals? There were times in my life where I spent 50% of my workload just writing proposals, and I simply can't afford this time anymore. And so I have to be very specific to the calls, and have to say those calls for wildfire emissions modeling and also observations are partly scarce. So there's for sure a need to focus on this problem, especially in terms of climate change and anticipated higher fire occurrence in the future. So, and I think to accomplish this, we all have to work together. That's for sure.
Great, thanks. We've got just a couple minutes left. I imagine everybody else has at least one more phone call today or something else they'd rather be doing. But I thank you for your time. I guess the next step here then is, I think we've kind of arrived at the idea that this would be a good thing to do, i.e., rounding up IARPIC's collective thought on this set of discussions that we've had so far, and where the next, in Simon's words, reachable steps may be just through better coordination or collaboration. And then secondarily, trying to identify likely RFPs or likely funding sources for the work once we know what those steps look like. So I guess the task I'll assign myself is to work with Meredith and others to get some synthetic boiled down version of these discussions, the needs we've heard, the capacities that we've heard, with the idea that maybe eventually we can move towards, and Allison, I'm going to not remember who you said might be well poised to actually do such a white paper, or if you thought it would be something that we should try to fund as an activity in and of itself, but to explore how that might get done.
I don't think I addressed that issue. I just said I just said I'm willing to help.
Okay. Well, I think that for me, that seems to be the next stepping stone in this conversation anyway, is to boil down what we heard on the atmosphere and human health call, and maybe circle back with some of the participants in that discussion that were unable to make it here, and then to try and envision what better coordination or collaboration might look like going forward. And Allison, I guess I'll work with you and Randy to see how that squares with what's next, both for the Fire Science Consortium and the Climate Science Center. I'm not sure where we go next yet because of the budget issues, but we'll at least retain some staff capacity for a while. So.
And Allison, this is Heidi. I'm willing to help you with that since I am familiar with those priorities a little bit. And yeah.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, Heidi.
You.
But I missed a call last week, so we need other people to throw inputs at it once we come up with something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Heidi, as Meredith made me aware, it was recorded, so you can actually, carve out, was it like 2 hours?
It's an hour and a half, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box in a moment.
So it is there if you find yourself with nothing else that you want to do. But other than that, I think we can.
Free time, yeah. Well, it might help to just have people jot down a couple bullets of what is most important to them or their agency, and then Allison and I can make sure we get that kind of need expressed correctly.
Okay.
So if you got something, send it.
All right. Well, hearing nothing else, we're approaching the hour. So I will thank you for your participation and ask you to look either on the website where you'll most likely see it, but then also if you hear anything from us with requests for clarification or anything like that, please do respond. But with that, we reconvene October 9th, is that right?
I think it's October 19th.
19th is the next terrestrial call, and I expect not everybody on this call will necessarily want to attend that one, but we'll get an agenda out for that before long.